What's up guys, I'm Robin and I make stuff. Today I'm painting a picture of Haystack Rock. You don't know what that is? Let me show you. So here's a picture of Haystack Rock. That is a haystack. And so is that. And so is that. Starting to see a theme. Haystack, Haystack Rock, Haystack, Haystack Rock. Okay, enough of that. Things I really loved about this picture that I got from unsplash.com. Check it out if you need inspiration of landscapes and other things to paint. Most of it is free to download and it's high resolution. This photo I loved because it has these really cool clouds in here and I can take the liberty of doing more if I want to. It has a rock that has some really cool texture in here, but also very clear shadows and very clear highlights. This would be easy to do. Same over here, just big blobs of rock. And then I had a little island thing back here with a little bit of fog. I can kind of play with that if I want to, but I really love this reflection here and playing with that, as well as these little wave ripples and adding those in. Here's how it turns out. And I'm going to walk you right through every step and the tips and tricks that I use when I'm paying attention to things like reflection, rock texture, skies, and the little tiny wave ripples. All right, so let's stop the chit chat and get into it. The first thing I'm gonna do is sketch out the main points of interest of this picture. The horizon line is really important because everything is kind of set off of that. Now, if you need more information about how to find the horizon line, vanishing points, and all that, I have videos that go into really good detail about that, which I'm not going to do in this video, so feel free to check those out. Once I get that horizon line, I know that the rocks are not sitting on that horizon line, because if they were, they would be like way out in the distance, and they're not, so they're slightly lower than that horizon line. Once I get those in there in a place that I think looks pretty good, I'm going to do wet on wet for this whole first part of this painting. With a 1.5 inch brush, I wet the entire paper. It doesn't have to be sopping wet. Then with my number 6 Da Vinci brush, love this brush, I am going to mix up some phthalo blue, which is why it's like real zingy and bright, a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt, and just dropping little swishes of paint in here. There's more definition in the clouds on the left-hand side of this photo, and so I'm just dropping little blobs of paint in there and letting the watercolor paint itself. And when I say that, I just mean don't overwork it. Be patient, put it in there, the water and the paint will move. You can tilt your board a little bit and let gravity do some of the work, but don't go back in and paint over it. Then I got my paper towel, kind of crumple it up, and just dabbed in a few areas, did a few little wipes and swipes just to create some texture and interest. I did not do that over the whole entire thing, just in a few areas where I had darker paint, just to create some interesting texture. Once I've got my sky where I like it, I am going to put blue down on the bottom. And why I'm doing this is because I want that blue from the sky to be reflected in the water. Even if you think that there are areas of this photograph that look white, I assure you they are not. So if you're gonna do a sunset or something like that in the sky, then you would want to have more warm colors down in the bottom, okay? So it's just reflecting the color of the sky. Then I mix up some brown, and at an angle, I kind of sweep those colors in there, a little bit of burnt sienna, and then I mixed up some blue into that to create something a little bit darker, cleaning up the edge of my board, just so I don't have some happy accident going on there. And I put a little bit of blue texture in here. I can add more texture into the sand by doing a little bit of splatter technique. I like to do that where I tap the brush on my finger versus tapping my finger on the brush, if that makes sense. I realized that this is going all over the place, so I decided to get a piece of paper, cover up my main areas, and then continue splattering. Now I want to make sure it's dry before I start working on Haystack Rock and the surrounding rocks that are there. If it's not dry, then the browns that I'm putting in here will bleed into the sky. And with rocks that are really close and you can, see the definition in them, you really want to have a nice crisp edge. As I started this, I realized this would be a lot easier if I put a piece of tape down here to just kind of define a nice straight edge where these rocks go into the ocean. I put a little piece of tape along there, and that allows me to just paint along that edge and create a nice straight line. So I'm putting this under layer of brown in here ultimately because these rocks are full of this brown color or really, really dark. And if I leave any areas unpainted, I want that lighter brown to come through as a highlight rather than trying to pull color out. Now with the little mountain area in the back, I wet the paper and then drop some light gray into the top of that and just let it do its thing. For these areas where the water ripples are coming up to the shore, I re-wet my paper right underneath the hard edge line. Let me show you what I mean. So we have these areas here where you don't have a lot of reflection, and this area here. So when I re-wet my paper, I wet it just below this section here and then just below this. And I drew a little guide on my paper just to note where those bands are, and they're going in this angle as if the vanishing point is over here, right? So they're converging and getting closer together as it goes off into the distance over here. So making sure that you leave this white gap and this white gap, and that these gaps get wider as they go off this way. This one gets wider as it goes off that way. This kind of disappears into light blue or gray. I am going to build on this a lot, and you'll see me kind of go back in. But for now, I'm doing wet on wet and letting the paint itself. So I put some burnt sienna in there and then came back with maybe some burnt umber and just tilting my board. Now you can see the angle that I have that bottom section in and the angle that I have that top section in, making sure that I leave white space in there. Now I'm going to start kind of defining where these water areas are that are coming up on the shore. And it took me a second to kind of rework this just a little bit. Ultimately, I want it to all kind of go at the same angle. And so just kind of laying these in here roughly right now, I'm gonna come back with my flat brush and really start to define those. So I find that with a flat brush, it really works well to define edges, whether it's edges of water, edges of a building, edges of trees, or edges of rocks. It's a really great brush to use, and I would highly recommend you getting that brush out and giving it a go. If you're a round brush user, just try it. So now I'm going in and building darker layers onto these rocks, focusing on that very, very dark area and kind of putting a little bit of texture here at the top. Again, I want that underlayer of brown to show through as highlights. And there are some little green areas like moss or trees or something on the top of Haystack Rock, and so I put a little bit of green in there. I put some raw sienna for some golden tones, and just starting to lay in some highlights and varying colors for this rock. And I'm gonna build this in so many layers. I can't stress that enough. Now getting even darker color in here and starting to put that in and really just define where I want these darks to go. Now, if your Haystack Rock or the rock you're working on is super wet, give it a little time to dry, or make sure it is dry and then come back. I'm working with not super watered down paint here, and so it's drying fairly quickly, which is allowing me to go back in and continuing to build this. And I also don't need it to be super, super sharp in terms of detail right now. As you're painting, make sure that you're paying attention to what area you painted last and moving through your painting in a way that lets various areas dry so you can come back and work on them kind of in this circular kind of flow as you're painting. So now going back to this reflection, adding a little bit of dry brushing on the edges and kind of just playing with texture. There is this sparkly texture on the edges where it just feels a little rough. And so I'm trying to capture and convey that. Then I made sure everything was really dry because I want these edges of this water ripple to be nice and crisp. If you think of a wave, the shadow of a wave is on the underneath side, not the top. So where these waves are coming in is where I want to have that shadow versus the back side. I don't need to define the back side. And then all of these are extra little ripples that you see casting shadow. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm putting in the shadow for these little tiny water waves. And then found like, okay, I don't really love that. It's too dark, too muddy. I'm gonna rework that. So I lifted some of that paint out and then adding some more warmer colors to this reflection. Just building on the texture, going in these back and forth movements with some line work there, really conveys that there is water and it's moving and there's ripples and it's catching the light in different ways. The sun is coming from the right-hand side of this photo, and so everything from the right-hand side is picking up that light and has more color detail. So I'm also paying attention to that in the reflective area of the water as well, and focusing on the darkest part of that reflection being on the left-hand side of this picture. Now I've mixed up some really dark color here, and my go-to for that is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. It's just a great color combination for getting really dark darks. You'll hear me talk about that a lot. It's my favorite. Trust the process. I'm really starting to define these very dark values in here. A little bit of texture using my flat brush along that top edge, some, suggestion of ridges right there, and just the rough and straight edge angles of these rocks. It works really well to use a flat brush. So now I'm going to kind of do the same thing and suggesting more water ripples in here and just kind of creating texture. And then I'm going to come back and kind of smooth some of those out. Now getting some blue and kind of adjusting and adding blue to the water and just some little bits of line work here and there, some of the edges, and then softening the edge of my reflection, because it does kind of soften and fade into nothing. So I'm trying to achieve that, lifting out a little bit of color, moving some color around, just focusing on defining that water ripple where that edge hits the sand. Lots of back and forth movements. And then I put a light wash of some darker color in there and kind of smooth things out just a little bit. With my flat brush, I cleaned it out and dried it off a little bit, and then just kind of moving it back and forth to lift out some of that color, which really sells it. When you're trying to do reflection on water or on sand or whatever it is, a light thing of water on a city street, lifting out these streaks of water will just bring it to life. I can't stress that enough. It just really helps to make it believable. Moving that around, lifting the color out, also moving some of the color around as well to just create some shadow as well as some highlights in those streaks of reflection and where it's catching the light. More darks, and continuing to build on that darkest side of Haystack Rock and just finalizing some of these last minute dark details in here. A few final strokes in the water, some more blues, a little bit of a gray, and just kind of setting the scene and tightening everything up. And you can keep putting more layers on until you are able to walk away and say, hey, that turned out pretty dang cool. And if you're at a point where you're like, this is not turning out cool, I would highly recommend getting up and looking at it from across the room. Thanks for hanging out. I hope that you learned something or remembered something that maybe you had forgotten, or just feel inspired to continue painting. If you have any questions about what I did or techniques I used or how I achieved something, leave me a comment. I'm happy to respond to those. I love hearing from you guys. I'm here for it all day, every day. If you found this tutorial awesome and want to see me paint more, definitely subscribe to my channel and hit the notification button so you'll be notified when I make new content. In the meantime, hope you have a great day and join me next time when I make stuff.
They wonder how I do it like that. 7 fit flex on the checks on that.